My name is Megan Parker, and for 11 years I kept my husband's secrets. Every loan, every hidden debt, every lie while helping him build the image of a successful businessman. Then one afternoon in a courtroom, I handed him exactly what he asked for and watched his perfect life collapse in real time. His attorney leaned close and whispered just 5 words. Only 5. And in that instant, the confident grin drained from Ethan Cole's face, the man who had sat across from me at the breakfast table for 15 years. Smug, certain, untouchable, went ghost pale. His hands began to shake. The documents he'd been so eager to sign rattled in his grip like paper caught in a strong wind. And me? For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind, because you need to understand how we ended up in that room. How the woman everyone assumed had lost her grip on reality was actually playing the longest, quietest game of her life. My name is Lauren Hale. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago I was married to Ethan Cole. 15 years, longer than most Hollywood marriages, longer than some startups survive. Definitely longer than my patience should have lasted. But I've always been stubborn. I inherited that from my grandmother. I met Ethan when I was 17. I'd graduated high school early, not because I was brilliant, but because I was practical, driven, and desperate to get out of my parents' house. I took a minimum wage job as a file clerk at Bennett and Rhodes Law Group. Endless paperwork, constant paper cuts, but it was mine. By 18, I'd worked my way up to legal assistant. I was good with details, good with numbers, and even better at staying quiet and observant. Ethan was 24 when we met at a client mixer. Charming, ambitious, overflowing with confidence. He talked about building a real estate empire like it was already inevitable, like success was just waiting for him to arrive. "I'm going to build something massive," he said. "I can help you file the paperwork," I replied. That was our love story. We got married when I was 19. Our son Noah was born when I was 20. I kept working part-time at the firm while raising him, building my 401k, saving every extra dollar. My grandmother always said, a woman should have her own money. Not secret money, she clarified, just hers, something no one could take. When I was 23, Ethan's business finally took off. He asked me to quit the firm and help him full-time. "I need someone I can trust," he said. So I became everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client coordinator, contractor liaison, model home decorator, marketing planner, event organizer, all unpaid. I did it while raising Noah, running the house, and keeping Ethan's entire life organized. My official title was wife. My real role was the backbone. For 11 years, I poured myself into his dream, and for 11 years, Ethan collected the praise. At industry events, I was Ethan's wife. At award dinners, he thanked his mentors, his team, his vision. He never thanked me. Somewhere along the way, something shifted. He stopped asking my opinion, started working late constantly, began criticizing small things. My clothes, my cooking, my lack of ambition. I was running his entire operation for free while raising our son. But sure, not ambitious enough. Then, 3 months ago, the ground collapsed. It was a Tuesday night. I was making his favorite dinner because apparently I enjoy wasting effort. He sat down at the kitchen table, calm and detached. "I want a divorce," he said. Then, without missing a beat, "I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Noah." He said it like he was ordering takeout. "I'll take the assets. Hold the kid." I stared at him. 15 years of marriage ended between the salt shaker and butter dish like I was just another item he no longer needed. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Ethan had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer, Richard Bowman. Expensive, experienced, ruthless. He'd been designing his exit while I was meal prepping and scheduling his dentist appointments. The next day, his mother showed up. Margaret Cole, perfect hair, practiced sympathy, permanent judgment. She squeezed my hand and told me I should have tried harder. Men have needs, sweetheart, she said slowly, like explaining math to a child. Interesting advice from a woman whose husband spent 7 days a week on a golf course to avoid her. But sure, I was the problem. That first week was chaos. Ethan moved me into the guest room, papers appeared, timelines, settlement drafts. Everything moved fast, and I felt like I was suffocating. Everyone saw a discarded wife, a woman blindsided after 15 years. What no one knew was that I'd discovered something 3 years earlier buried deep in Ethan's financial records. Something he believed was invisible, and I'd been quietly preparing ever since. Within a week, the guest room became permanent. My closet shrank to 2 small sections he generously allowed me to keep. The message was clear: this is no longer your house. 2 weeks later, he introduced her. Madison Reed. 27. Worked at his company, of course she did. Perfect hair. Perfect nails. Yoga pants worth more than my grocery bill. She walked into my kitchen like she owned it, wore my apron, my grandmother's apron, while making smoothies in my blender. Ethan displayed her like a prize. They sat on my couch, ate off my plates, watched my TV. He wrapped his arm around her right in front of me, like I was already gone. Then came the financial control. First, he cancelled my personal credit card. Just separating finances, he said. Then the joint one. Then he suggested I should move out temporarily. My own home, Margaret came over to help me pack. She decided what I was allowed to keep. Old clothes? Fine. Some family photos? Maybe. My grandmother's recipe box? She hesitated. Jewelry Ethan bought me? No. Furniture I picked? No. Anything valuable? Absolutely not. She packed my life into garbage bags, not boxes. Garbage bags. Through all of this, I thought I had one ally, Rachel Moore, my best friend of 20 years. She brought wine, listened to me cry, told me I deserved better. But something felt wrong. Ethan knew my plans before I shared them publicly. When I mentioned to Rachel that I might fight for the house, Noah came home saying his dad told him it was pointless. When I mentioned looking at apartments in a certain area, Ethan commented that it was too expensive for me. Then it clicked. Rachel had always admired Ethan a little too much, laughed too hard, asked about him first, always him. She'd been in love with my husband for 15 years, and Ethan knew it. He fed her just enough hope to keep her loyal. My best friend was his informant. The worst part wasn't Ethan, or Margaret, or Rachel. It was Noah. He saw everything. The girlfriend. The bags. The way his father spoke about me. Ethan poisoned him slowly. Your mum is making this difficult. I just want peace. She won't cooperate. Noah grew distant. Confused. I could lose the house, the money, the life I built. But watching my son doubt me, that was the real wound. I hired a lawyer, Caroline Russo. Early 50s, sharp, no patience for nonsense. You helped build this, she said. You're entitled to half. We fight. I asked quietly, what if I don't want to? She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Everyone thought I'd given up. They were wrong, because when people underestimate you, they stop watching. And that's when you learn everything. 3 years earlier, on a random Tuesday night, I found it. Hidden transfers, strange accounts, a pattern. Ethan had taken loans against everything. Our house, it had 3 mortgages, and that was just the beginning. The numbers told the real story. The original mortgage, $400,000. A second mortgage taken out 4 years later, $350,000. A third one, 2 years after that, another $350,000. Total owed on the house, $1.1 million. Actual market value, $850,000. We were $250,000 underwater on a home I believed we owned outright. And the business? Even worse. Credit lines maxed out at $200,000. Back taxes, $85,000. Unpaid vendors, $120,000. Equipment loans, $75,000. The company Ethan loved to brag about, the one he paraded at networking events, was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars were a lie. All three were leased, with balloon payments looming. We didn't actually own anything. We just paid enormous monthly bills to keep up the illusion. At 3 in the morning, I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and bank statements, doing the math over and over. Total debt, about $1.9 million. Real asset value, maybe $1.6 million. We were at least $300,000 in the red. So where had all the money gone? I kept digging. Over the next several weeks, I traced every transaction I could find. What surfaced made my stomach turn. Crypto investments, $180,000 completely wiped out. Online gambling, $75,000 gone. A secret apartment I didn't know existed, rented for a woman I'd never met, $60,000 in rent and furnishings. Luxury expenses that never crossed my doorstep, designer watches, suits, private trips I was never invited on, another $85,000. Ethan wasn't building an empire. He was stacking a house of cards, using borrowed cards, while the whole thing was already on fire. We looked wealthy the way a department store mannequin looks alive. Convincing from across the room, completely hollow up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to demand answers. But I knew Ethan. If I confronted him, he'd twist it, minimize it, gaslight me until I doubted my own sanity. He'd probably blame me somehow. Worse, if he knew I knew, he might try to get his hands on the one thing he couldn't touch, because I'd always kept something of my own. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. A woman should have her own money. I still had my old retirement account from the law firm. I'd rolled it over when I quit, never touched it. By then, it had grown to about $180,000. That money was mine, earned independently, separate property. And then there was my grandmother herself. She passed away when I was 28 and left me $340,000. Her will was crystal clear. This money is for Lauren alone. I never mixed it with household funds, never used it for bills, never let Ethan near it. She'd kept her own account for 50 years. Not secret money, just hers. Between my IRA and my inheritance, I had roughly $520,000 that was legally and completely mine. So I didn't confront Ethan. I fortified myself. With the help of my uncle, a retired CPA, I created an irrevocable trust for Noah. My retirement account and inheritance went into that trust. My name wasn't listed as a beneficiary. Ethan's name wasn't anywhere near it. The money was for Noah's future, college, a home, emergencies, untouchable. Then I documented everything, every mortgage, every hidden account, every suspicious transfer. I printed copies and stored them at my sister's house, put duplicates in a safe deposit box, backed everything up on an encrypted drive, and then I waited. I knew Ethan would leave eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, they find someone younger, they decide they deserve more. I just had to be ready. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of watching him sink deeper, 3 years of smiling at dinner parties while knowing our entire life was built on quicksand. When Ethan finally demanded the divorce and insisted on the house, the cars, the business, I nearly laughed. He wasn't asking for assets, he was demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the present, I sat across from Caroline Rousseau and placed 3 thick binders on her desk. 3 years of evidence. She read in silence for almost an hour. Finally, she looked up. "You've known about this for 3 years." "I was waiting," I said. "I knew he'd leave, and when he demanded everything, he'd take all the debt with him." The sympathy vanished from her face, replaced by something closer to admiration. So if you sign over the assets, she said slowly, you walk away clean. He takes the mortgages, the business liabilities, the leases, everything. I nodded. My inheritance and retirement were never commingled. They're protected, sitting safely in a trust for my son. Caroline leaned back and smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Mrs. Messes, hail, she said. I owe you an apology. I thought you'd given up. I smiled back. Everyone does. Her expression shifted, no longer pity, no longer concern, respect. The trap was already built, the math was verified, the paperwork was airtight, all I had to do was let Ethan believe he was winning, and no one plays the gracious loser better than a woman who's had 15 years of practice. The next 3 months were pure theatre. I became exactly what everyone expected. Exhausted, defeated, barely holding myself together. At mediation, my eyes were red. My hands shook. My voice stayed soft and uncertain. I just want enough to start over, I said. I know the business is his life. I don't want to make this harder than it already is. I asked for $50,000 cash, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Noah. That was it. Ethan agreed instantly. He'd expected a fight. Any competent lawyer would have demanded half. Instead, I asked for crumbs. He looked at me like a wounded animal he was mercifully sparing. I deserved an award for that performance. With every passing week, Ethan grew more arrogant. He stopped pretending to be fair. She didn't even fight, he told his friends. I offered a reasonable settlement, and she folded. His mother was worse. She bragged everywhere. Church, book club, luncheons. Vincent kept everything. That woman didn't get a penny. I always knew she wasn't strong enough. To celebrate, Ethan bought himself a $15,000 watch charged to the business account. He wore it proudly to our next mediation session. He also took Madison to the French restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. Posted photos online. Life is better with the right person. Meanwhile, Madison redecorated my house. New furniture, new art. She painted my kitchen grey. Grey. I spent 3 weeks choosing that sage green testing samples, checking light. She erased it in one afternoon. Fitting, really. Rachel kept calling, fishing for updates. How are you holding up? She'd ask, dripping with concern. I'm just tired, I'd say softly. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. Within hours, Ethan would know, and I could almost feel him relaxing, lowering his guard even more. Exactly where I needed him.
Rachel thought she was outplaying me. In reality, she was just acting as a delivery service. Not a very smart one either. While the adults were busy scheming, Noah was paying attention. And my son, bright, observant, and far more perceptive than anyone gave him credit for, started noticing cracks in the story. He noticed his dad's shiny $15,000 watch, then heard Ethan say they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Madison's shopping bags piling up by the door, while Ethan complained that money was tight. He noticed the mismatch between the image his father projected and the excuses he kept making. One evening, Noah came to my small apartment and sat at my second-hand kitchen table. He looked at me with those serious eyes, so much like his father's, but with something Ethan had lost long ago: honesty. "Mom," he said quietly, "is Dad actually rich?" I studied my son for a moment. "What do you think?" He paused, thinking. "I think something's wrong. I think he's pretending." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Just wait a little longer. Trust me." My 15-year-old had figured it out before 2 lawyers and a CPA. I really should have billed his college fund for consulting fees. Behind the scenes, Caroline Russo was assembling our strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement stated clearly that I was surrendering all claims to marital property: the house, the business, the vehicles, everything. In exchange, I'd receive my modest cash settlement and walk away. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure. Every mortgage, every loan, every debt tied to those assets. When Ethan signed for the assets, he also assumed every single liability. The mortgages became his responsibility. The business debts transferred entirely to him. The car leases became his problem alone. All perfectly legal, all devastating. Legal documents are like poetry, Caroline told me once. Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favorite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Ethan's lawyer, Richard Bowman, called Caroline with concerns. "My client is assuming significant assets," Richard said carefully. "I'd like to request a full financial audit before finalizing, just to verify everything." Caroline kept her tone neutral. "Of course, we'll provide any documentation you need." But when Richard brought the idea to Ethan, my soon-to-be ex shut it down immediately. "No audits," Ethan snapped. "I built that company. I know what it's worth." Richard tried again. "I strongly recommend verification before you sign. This is substantial." "No," Ethan cut him off. "Madison wants this done. I want this done. No delays." Richard had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew a bad decision when he saw one. He also knew he couldn't force a client to listen. So he did the only thing he could. He presented Ethan with a waiver, an acknowledgement stating that legal counsel had recommended an independent financial review and that the client was declining against advice. Ethan signed it without reading, just like everything else. Never underestimate the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man ignore the fine print. Madison was worth millions to me in legal strategy. The night before the hearing, Ethan sent me a text. "Thank you for not making this ugly." I stared at the screen for a long time. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building his business, raising his son, managing his life, and he was thanking me for being convenient while he discarded me. I typed back, "I just want what's best for Noah." What was best for Noah was already secured. His trust, his future, and a father who was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Caroline called that evening. "Thursday, 9 a.m., final hearing, Judge Elaine Porter. Are you ready?" I looked around my small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the half-unpacked boxes, the tiny kitchen I'd painted sage green because it reminded me of hope. I've been ready for 3 years. Thursday morning, Ethan would walk into court expecting to collect his prize. He had no idea he was about to inherit a financial avalanche, one he'd personally requested in writing. Thursday, April 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I remember every detail. The sunlight through tall windows, the smell of old wood and floor polish, the quiet rustle of paperwork. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Ethan arrived first. Of course he did. He wore his best suit, the charcoal Armani I'd helped him choose years earlier. His new watch gleamed as he shook hands with Richard. He looked confident, relaxed, victorious. Caroline waited in the hallway, perfect makeup, designer bag, scrolling her phone like this was just another errand. Margaret sat in the gallery, dressed for celebration, probably planning a victory lunch. When I walked in, she gave me a small, satisfied smile, the kind you give someone you believe you have already beaten. I arrived minutes later. Simple navy dress, no jewelry, hair pulled into a low bun. I looked exhausted, defeated. Perfect. Judge Elaine Porter entered, early 60s, silver hair, glasses perched on her nose. 30 years on the family court bench. Nothing surprised her anymore. She reviewed the file, then looked up. Cole versus Cole, final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Richard stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Ethan Cole, is assuming all marital assets, including the residence, the business, and associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Hale receives a $50,000 cash settlement. Caroline stood beside me. That is correct, Your Honor. Judge Porter turned her gaze at me, studying my face carefully. Mrs. Hale, she said, you're relinquishing your claim to substantial property, including a business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? My voice stayed soft. Yes, Your Honor. I looked down, then back up. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. The judge hesitated. I could see her weighing whether to intervene, but I was represented, clear, calm. So she said, "Very well, let's proceed." The clerk distributed the documents, page after page. Ethan signed eagerly, barely skimming. I signed slowly, carefully. Across the room, Ethan smiled at his mother. She nodded proudly. His phone buzzed in the hallway, probably Madison cheering him on. Richard reviewed the packet one final time. Main agreement signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement, and everything was about to change. I watched closely as his eyes moved across the pages. At first, there was smug confidence, then hesitation. His brow tightened. He flipped backward, then forward again, as if hoping he'd misunderstood what he was seeing. He hadn't. The color drained from Ethan Reynolds' face. He leaned toward his attorney, Mark Lawson, lowering his voice. "We need to talk, right now." Mark glanced up, alarmed. Ethan waved him off, still riding the high of what he thought was a victory. "Later, let's finish this." Mark leaned in again, urgency sharpening his whisper. "You're accepting full responsibility for the debt." That got Ethan's attention. "What debt?" he snapped. "The disclosure stuff?" Mark pointed to the documents, papers rustling. "The mortgages, the business loans, the leases, every personal liability. You're assuming all of it." For the first time, Ethan actually read what he had signed. I watched his eyes widen as the numbers sank in. The house, $1.1 million owed. Market value, barely $850,000. Business debts, $480,000. Vehicle leases, $115,000. Personal obligations, another $200,000. Total debt, nearly $1.9 million. Net worth of everything he'd just claimed, negative $300,000. He hadn't won assets, he'd inherited a financial sinkhole. Ethan shot up from his chair, scraping loudly against the courtroom floor. "This can't be right." His head snapped between me, the judge, and the paperwork. "She hid this from me. This is fraud." Judge Elaine Carter didn't raise her voice, but it cut sharply through the room. "Mr. Reynolds, sit down." "These numbers are fake," Ethan insisted, panic leaking into his tone. "She manipulated the documents." "Sit down." The judge left no space for debate. He obeyed, but his hands were shaking now. The confident grin was gone, replaced by pure fear. Judge Carter scanned the paperwork, then looked directly at him. "Mr. Reynolds, these liabilities are attached to assets you are claiming, your home, your company, your accounts. Are you telling this court you were unaware of your own financial obligations?" Silence. Watching him try to explain his ignorance felt like watching someone deny a crime while holding the evidence. Uncomfortable, unconvincing. Mark cleared his throat. "Your Honor, for the record, I advised my client to commission an independent financial review before this hearing. He declined. I have a signed waiver." He handed it over, the waiver Ethan had signed without reading, the one stating clearly that a full audit had been recommended and refused. Judge Carter skimmed it. So Mr. Reynolds was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He acknowledged that choice in writing. She looked back at him. "Is that your signature?" A long pause. "Yes." "Then you accepted the risk knowingly," she said calmly. "The agreement stands." Ethan turned toward me, desperation cracking his voice. You knew all of this." I met his gaze without flinching. "I handled your books for 11 years, Ethan. Of course I knew." His face shifted rapidly. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, until it landed on the one expression I'd waited for. Understanding. "This isn't fair," he said desperately, turning back to the bench. "I didn't understand what I was signing." Judge Carter shook her head. "You signed under oath, stating you understood the terms. You were represented by counsel. You declined further review. Your wife concealed nothing. These are your debts." She brought the gavel down. "Miss Parker, your settlement is granted. Mr. Reynolds, you receive the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is legally dissolved." I stood, straightened my jacket, picked up my bag. Before leaving, I looked at Ethan one last time. He sat slumped in his chair, papers scattered, his reality collapsing around him. "You said you wanted everything except our son. I gave you exact of that." I walked out without turning back. In the hallway, Ethan's voice echoed, shouting at Mark, accusing him, threatening lawsuits. Mark remained calm. "I advised an audit, you refused. It's documented." Through the glass doors, I saw Sabrina's face change as she listened, watched her really look at Ethan, no longer the successful businessman she'd thought she'd secured. She left before I reached the elevator, fast, heels clicking, no glance back. Her exit from his life was quicker than her entrance into my marriage. Outside, April sunlight warmed my face, blue sky, fresh air. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was still shouting about fairness and betrayal. Ahead of me was something new, smaller, quieter, but fully mine. The fallout came fast. Within 2 weeks, Sabrina packed up in the middle of the night and disappeared, leaving a note on the counter. "This isn't what I signed up for." A month later, Ethan tried to sell the house, but when you owe more than something is worth, buyers vanish and banks take over. Calls, notices, threats. By month 2, the business defaulted, vendors sued, credit lines froze. A company built over 15 years began collapsing. By month 3, Ethan was sitting in bankruptcy offices, calculating what little he could protect. The answer? Almost nothing. His mother's perfect son started calling relatives for loans, spinning stories about betrayal and deception. I didn't know, she hid it. But the paperwork said otherwise. Every loan, every mortgage, every reckless decision, his name, his signature. I heard the family holiday newsletter that year was brief. Ethan is exploring new opportunities. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. The final threads of the conflict unraveled with a kind of quiet symmetry. About a week after the hearing, Rachel called me. Her voice trembled through the phone. "I had no idea things were this bad. I'm so sorry, Megan. I never meant, I thought Ethan and I didn't respond. I didn't interrupt. I didn't forgive. I didn't give her the closure she wanted. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. Some friendships don't deserve a second attempt, especially not after 20 years of loyalty traded for flirtation and empty promises from a man who used everyone around him." She called 3 more times. Then she stopped. I imagine she's still waiting for Ethan to choose her. She'll be waiting forever. His mother tried a different angle. She went through my son. "Tell your mom I didn't know about the money problems," Margaret said. "Tell her I'm sorry for how I treated her. Tell her I want to talk." My son looked at his grandmother, the woman who packed his mother's clothes into trash bags, who called her useless, who defended his father without hesitation, and said calmly, "Mom's busy rebuilding her life. She doesn't have time for excuses." Margaret wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? My son, smart, observant, quietly resilient, understood everything without me explaining a word. He saw the court filings, heard his father's excuses, watched the girlfriend walk away, watched his grandmother panic as the illusion collapsed. About a month after the divorce, he and I sat together in my small apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, the secondhand couch, the last box finally unpacked. "You waited 3 years," he said softly. "You knew how bad it was, and you waited. I needed to be sure you were protected, no matter what happened between your father and me. The trust fund, $520,000, untouched, locked away for his future. College, a first home, security no one could steal." He was quiet for a moment. Then he hugged me, really hugged me, the kind of hug 15-year-old boys don't give easily, the kind that says, "I see you," the kind that says, "I'm proud of you." I knew then that I'd done something right. My $50,000 settlement went towards stability, first month's rent, deposit, furniture that didn't wobble. Nothing fancy, just solid. The trust fund stayed exactly where it belonged, and I finally chose myself. I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, the dream I abandoned at 23 to help build Ethan's empire. Now I was building my own. I started small. My first real client was Linda, 52, freshly divorced after 28 years. She stood in her empty apartment and asked me, "How do you even start over?" I smiled. One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. "Happy tears," she said. "It feels like a beginning." 3 months after the divorce, Ethan showed up at my door. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, the unhealthy kind. Dark circles framed his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. His watch was gone. He looked like a man who'd fought a war and lost. For just a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said quietly. "I made mistakes. I see that now." I leaned against the doorframe and really looked at him, the man I loved for half my life, the man who discarded me, the man now drowning in his own decisions. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Maybe we can, I don't know, maybe we could." He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. "You asked for everything except our son," I said evenly. "You got exactly what you wanted." "Megan, please." "Goodbye, Ethan." I closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 full minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. Best show I've ever seen. 5 stars, would absolutely watch again. Later that night, after my son went to bed, I sat in the quiet living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. Her old recipe box sat beside it, the one thing almost taken from me, the one thing that truly mattered. "You were right, Grandma. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." The apartment was quiet, small, nothing like the house I lived in for 15 years, but it was mine. Every color, every piece of furniture, every choice. Mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free.